President, I'd just like to open by saying that I am a renter. I believe I am the only renter in the upper house. And if someone is renting and I'd like to prove you wrong, then please raise your hand. Dr. Brian Walker, I think you own multiple houses, so I'm going to rule you out.
Member, I'm not sure where in the standing orders there is reference to a show of hands like you've just asked for. Could you just
Thank you for your
stick to the question that the bill be read a second time? Thank you.
Acting President, I'm a renter, and as a renter in WA, and certainly coming back in 2021, I would say that the default position in the state as a renter in this state is one of frustration and powerlessness. Now, just because I'm a renter, I don't think it gives me the moral authority on the topic, but it certainly gives me a lot of lived experience and certainly a lot of empathy as well, having been in that situation for people who are renting and have experienced, I believe it's 13 rate rise increases since May 2022. And the increase in cost of living that we're all experiencing here in Western Australia, and majority, as we've heard of those interest rate increases, are passed down to renters to absorb at the bottom of that social contract. And so my take on this bill is it has missed the mark. It is more of the same. And the elephant in the room, and really the largest ask by renters, and I do have an amendment that goes into detail here, is around no grounds evictions. And before I unpack no grounds evictions, Acting President, I will say, as a renter, I am constantly frustrated. I do feel powerless in this very inflexible system. But as a Member of Parliament, and having engaged with this debate over the course of the last few years, and really being subject to recent announcements by the government in this space, I do feel an equal measure of frustration because the government continually sides with property investors and landlords in the face of the renter pool, which is just under 30% of the population. And it feels like they are the ones that are missing out on any attention and any real security in the reform that we're currently debating. Acting President, this frustration really does stem from having conversations with renters who have reached out to me on social media, who I have spoken to in person, and they've shared a lot of stories. Now, there is a growing cohort of renters out there who, to put it bluntly, feel like they're being screwed over by their landlords. I'm not here to say all landlords are inherently evil. I think any cohort of people, there are unscrupulous actors in the system, and that's certainly what we as legislators should be concerning ourselves with. But there are renters in this system right now who do feel like they're being screwed over by landlords, and they don't have any means in which to raise their issues. Renters who are certainly struggling to make payments and feel like they will, if the status quo continues on, they will become homeless. Renters who are facing evictions, given how tight this rental market is, it is rather a death sentence. It can mean that you are out on the street. We had the WA, and in particular Perth, had the tightest rental vacancies in the country. And most importantly, and this is probably the largest cohort, it's renters that don't feel like they can speak up when they've got a legitimate concern to raise for fear of being evicted from their property. And Acting President, all I can do as a Member of Parliament is, well, firstly listen and direct these renters who are experiencing these issues to the Rent Relief Program, which admittedly is a good program, to the Commerce website and explain and walk people through their existing rights as a tenant. But what I can't do as a Member of Parliament is offer them any real relief on the horizon around any meaningful reform that's going to improve their situation. Because this bill is more of the same. There are minor provisions that are included here, but the elephant in the room, and the thing that renters are really crying out for and calling for, is the removal of no grounds evictions. And that is absent in this bill. Acting President, as a renter, coming back in 2021, I was faced with the inflexibility of the system. I really felt the full force of that. And there were a couple of disputes between myself and the property manager, which I won't air those grievances in here. But at the end of the day, I had to lump this cost. And I was privy to, I guess, just how inflexible the system actually has become, and how this balance between landlords, between investors, between renters and tenants is in WA and certainly in Australia. Now, the claim by the government around that this bill strikes the right balance, I think is a bit disingenuous, and it doesn't take into account really the full debate that we've had in Australia that's led to this point, and certainly in this state. And really, this balance hasn't been right for decades, really. Property prices have been increasing since the 50s. It's quite a safe bet to hedge your money into property, which is one of the largest wealth assets in this country. Now, successive governments are guilty of this, of incentivising people to treat the property market as an investment pool, as opposed to an essential right of Australians, of West Australians. Now, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with putting your money, with incentivising people to build houses, to invest in the property market. But it needs to go hand in hand with ensuring that people who want to try and get into the property market for their first home can do so, who aren't necessarily on the top of the wage bracket, rather than someone who is buying their seventh negatively geared property. And also there are protections for renters. We know that renters are renting for longer periods. Wages haven't kept up with property prices for a very long time. And there's a growing cohort of people who don't feel like they could ever get out of this rental trap, this rental spiral. So they're renting for longer periods of time. So you need to make adequate provisions as you incentivise people to invest in the property market, to also ensure that people feel secure and safe in their rental environment. And this is what we're debating today, and this bill doesn't go far enough to give those assurances to that just under 30% of the WA cohort who are renting. Now, the government's position is that they don't support no grounds evictions. And there's been a bit of commentary. I've asked a few questions as to why the government won't support no grounds evictions. But we've heard that the government doesn't want to spook the investment market. It doesn't want to de-incentivise investment and cause people to flee and to disinvest in the property market. And they're saying that it may happen. And look, I agree with that statement. It may happen. Anything may happen. This economy is a complex beast of cause and effect. So it certainly may happen. But I think the onus on the government is to prove that it will happen, rather than just say may happen. It feels like a lazy argument. Now, I've tried to get to the bottom of this. I've tried to look for some evidence, or really get a show of evidence from the government around their position. Can you justify your position that it not just might happen, but it actually will happen? Because I've looked, and I've looked outside of WA as well, and I can't see any evidence to suggest that it will happen. And in fact, I found evidence to the contrary. I found that if you increase rental reform, it doesn't cause disinvestment in the property market. Now, there is a housing affordability in West Australia report, which was commissioned last year. And I know the Minister for Commerce has been quick to point at this report. The report says that reforms designed to aid tenants might have the opposite effect if supply were to contract even further. And I absolutely agree with that statement. It might happen. But the report doesn't actually really back in the government's position here at all. It says it might happen. It goes on to say a thorough assessment of the reforms that would deliver a private rental system equitable for both tenants and landlords is required. So that report isn't that thorough assessment. So my question here is, and hopefully we can tease this out as part of the debate, is has the government done their homework here? Have they done the work to prove their position? And if they have, then then happy days. I'm happy to sit down and support this bill. I will happily support the passage of this bill. And hopefully we can tease it out, because I don't think the government has done their homework. Now, someone who has done their homework, the Australian Housing Urban Research Institute, they published a report that reached the conclusion that tenancy laws had very little impact on landlords' decisions around investing in private rental housing. So there's a number of more macro level considerations that go into the property market. And as I said, multiple governments at the state and the federal level have been guilty of this. You talk about stamp duty concessions or negative gearing. These are larger concessions that people take into account when we talk about investing, as opposed to the rights of the tenant. There is a Make Renting Fair Alliance survey that actually goes into detail on this. I will talk about it when we get into the meat of the no grounds evictions. But majority of landlords don't actually realise that no grounds actually exists. But on the flip side of that coin, majority of renters really do know that it exists. And if landlords aren't aware of this provision, then they're not using it, and it's not a consideration for them when they're investing in the market. This, the Australian Housing Urban Research Institute goes on to say, so these comments attribute to the lead author, and said the research debunks the often made claim by the property lobby that changes to tenancy laws serve a disincentive for landlords to enter or exit the rental property market. And it goes on to say that overall, we found that Australian residential tenancies law reform has accommodated, even facilitated, the long-term growth of the private rental sector rather than causing disinvestment. So this is the basis of my claim. And again, if the government has anything to disprove this or has evidence to the contrary, then please, let's put the cards on the table, because now is the time to have that debate and have that conversation. I will have more to say on no grounds provisions. What I will say, though, is we've heard an announcement that there is potentially a second tranche or a second wave of reform coming. This is the first sweep, if you will. It's given where we are in the election cycle, I wouldn't hold my breath to see that second tranche and that second wave. This is what we're dealing with now. And when I do have those conversations with renters about, what is coming, what are the protections for me, how do I feel more safe and secure in my rental, there's little hope when you talk about a second tranche that may or may not come. And also, if it does come, it may or may not give additional protection to renters. It may continue the status quo of this government and side with property investors. Now, there was an announcement recently where there was a meeting, I think it was the National Cabinet of Housing Ministers, and they agreed to genuine grounds evictions, and I believe WA signed up to that. And again, this is a federal conversation. It's an ongoing conversation. WA may have said, look, we agree in principle, but we haven't seen the detail, and we don't know when that's actually coming. So it's little relief for people who are really struggling at the moment. And to put this in real terms, with the rental cohort in WA, so there's about approximately 776,000 renters in this state, many of whom will be impacted by these changes. So it's a very large cohort. So there is a requirement to get this right. It's not a small percentage of people. It is a very large number of people who are very keenly aware of the proposed changes. And on the flip side, there's a very small number of landlords and property investors, property managers, who seem to have a very loud seat at the table, who seem to get all the weight and the consideration in this debate. Acting President, I will say there are some good bits to this bill, absolutely. And we can get into that when we get into the meat of this of the bill. But really, they fly in the face of really the big ask, and it is the biggest ask that renters are demanding and want to see, and that is no grounds terminate or remove no grounds provisions to give them some assurity. Because if you talk about hanging your pet, hanging your painting, or being able to have a pet, that really doesn't mean anything if you can't stay in your accommodation. You don't have that security and that assurance that that home is secure and you can stay in there for a longer period of time. So, Acting President, there are some good bits, so my position is to oppose this bill, and I oppose it not because of the good bits, but rather from what it's lacking and the missed opportunity that we have, because this is what we're dealing with now, and there isn't anything else coming in the near future. Certainly, we're talking years. WA has the weakest tenancy laws in the country, and this does very little to move the needle any further. And so we're still going to be lagging behind. We haven't seen any disinvestment in New South Wales or Victoria when they tighten their laws. This has become an election issue in Tasmania. Victoria is going one step beyond the rent bidding requirements that we will debate very shortly. They've found loopholes in the system, and they're looking to move that needle even further and plug it up. Meanwhile, we're playing catch up. WA is years and years behind every other state and territory. And this does very little to give relief for those renters, and it is for that reason that I oppose this bill today.
Members, the question is the bill be